Every time you say the Lord's Prayer, you speak a word that does not exist anywhere else in the ancient world. Not in philosophy, not in literature, not in a single surviving Greek text outside of this one prayer. That word sits in Matthew chapter 6, verse 11, 7 words in the original Greek, and one of them is a word no translator in 2,000 years has agreed on how to render. The English reading is not wrong, it is incomplete. The Greek underneath this line carries something the translation could not preserve. In 382 AD, one man was given the job of translating it into Latin, and he gave it 2 contradictory definitions in the same Bible. And before him, a scholar said something about this word that most Christians have never been told. Your English Bible reads, "Give us this day our daily bread." The word translated as daily is epiousios. Strong's number 1967, and it appears nowhere else in the entire Greek language. Not in Plato, not in Aristotle, not in a single letter, document, or receipt from the ancient world. Thayer's Greek lexicon states directly that it is a word found only in Matthew chapter 6 verse 11 and Luke chapter 11 verse 3. That is not a difficult translation problem. That is a word that has no comparison point, no other context to check it against, no second verse to confirm what it means. The most famous prayer on the planet contains a word that the men who wrote the Gospels appear to have built from scratch, and no one in the 20 centuries since has been able to fully agree on what they meant by it. The Greek text, the Latin manuscript, the date it was changed, and the 3 competing meanings that were collapsed into one English word. All of it sits inside this single line of the prayer you have been saying since you were a child. By the end of this, you will have the original word, you will know what it was built from, and you will have a way to pray this line that the English has never given you access to. That story starts with a man named Jerome, a desk in Rome, and a word that stopped him cold. In the year 382, Pope Damasus I gave one man a single job: produce one authoritative Latin Bible for the entire church. The man he chose was Jerome, arguably the most skilled translator alive at the time. Jerome had the Greek manuscripts in front of him, he had the Hebrew texts, he had decades of training in both languages, and he sat down in Rome to begin what would become the Latin Vulgate, the Bible that would shape Western Christianity for the next 1,000 years. He reached the Lord's Prayer. Matthew chapter 6, verse 11. "Give us this day our daily bread." The Greek word behind daily was epiousios, and Jerome did something no translator is supposed to do. He gave it 2 different answers. In Matthew, he wrote the Latin word supersubstantialem. That was a word he had to invent. It means above substance, super meaning above, substantia meaning substance, a Latin word built to carry a Greek word that had no Latin equivalent. Then he reached Luke chapter 11 verse 3, the exact same prayer, the exact same Greek word, "Give us day by day our daily bread," same word, epiousios. And this time Jerome wrote quotidianum. That is a common Latin word. It just means daily, routine, ordinary, every day. One prayer, one Greek word, 2 contradictory Latin translations, in the same Bible, from the same translator. The man who was supposed to settle this question could not settle it himself. Now, you might think epiousios was simply a difficult word, a rare word with a tricky shade of meaning. It was not rare. It was something stranger than that. 150 years before Jerome, a man named Origen was writing a treatise on prayer. Around 233 AD, in the city of Caesarea, he reached this same word, epiousios, and he stopped. He wrote that this word is not employed by any of the Greek writers, nor by philosophers, nor by individuals in common usage. He said it appears to have been invented by the Evangelists themselves. Matthew and Luke did not choose a word. They coined one. Your Bible says daily. That is a guess. The word the prayer actually uses was so far beyond ordinary Greek that the men who wrote the Gospels had to build it from scratch. And the man tasked with translating it tried 2 answers and still could not close the gap. You have been praying a word that has no parallel in the language it was written in, and every English Bible handed you the least interesting option. The next time you open your mouth to pray this line, you will feel the weight of epiousios sitting where daily used to be. Not because someone corrected you, because the text itself showed you what was there. And now that you have seen it, the old rendering cannot hold, But Jerome knew Epiousios was not daily. That is why he reached for above substance in Matthew. He was grasping for something Origen had pointed to a century and a half earlier. And even that was not enough, because the bread this word modifies is not what you were told either, and that changes the weight of the entire line. The English says bread. Most people picture a loaf, food on a table, something you eat to get through the day. The Greek word is Artos, Strong 740. Thayer defines it as food composed of flour mixed with water and baked. Bread, a loaf. That is the primary meaning, and that is how it functions in dozens of New Testament passages. But Artos does not stay on the table in this prayer. In John chapter 6, verse 35, Jesus says, "I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst." The word he uses for bread is Artos, the same word, the exact noun that sits in Matthew chapter 6, verse 11, being modified by the impossible word Epiousios. The church reading of bread in the Lord's Prayer has served millions of people well. That is not the issue. The issue is what Artos becomes when you trace it through the text, because Jesus does not compare himself to a loaf. He claims the word. He says, "I am this. This noun is me." And the trail goes further back. In John chapter 6, verse 32, Jesus says, "Moses gave you not that bread from heaven, but my Father giveth you the true bread from heaven." He is pointing to Exodus chapter 16, verse 4, where God says, "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day." That bread had one rule: it could not be stored for tomorrow. Exodus chapter 16, verse 20 says, "Those who tried to keep it found it bred worms and stank." Every day you had to trust that more would come. The provision was real, but the provision required you to face forward. You could not hoard yesterday's bread and use it to avoid depending on what was coming. The bread of the original Exodus was not a commodity. It was a daily act of trust aimed at what was coming next. And Jesus in John 6 deliberately positions himself as the fulfillment of that bread, not the bread Moses gave, the true bread from the Father. So when Matthew chapter 6 verse 11 says, "Give us this day our Epiousios Artos," both words are loaded. The bread is the same word Jesus uses for himself. The modifier is a word no one in the ancient world had ever seen. Together, they form a request the English cannot carry. You have likely kept the Lord's Prayer bread and the John 6 bread in separate rooms your whole life. They were never separate. The same Greek word sits in both passages. Now that you see Artos bridging the prayer and the bread of life discourse, the request in this line stops sounding like a request for groceries. It sounds like a request for the thing Jesus said he was. And from this point forward, every time you say daily bread, you will hear Artos underneath it, not a loaf. A word with a lineage that reaches into the heart of what Jesus claimed to be. But if the bread is not just food, and the word modifying it is not daily, what exactly is the prayer asking for? That answer is inside the root of Epiousios itself, and the root appears 5 times in the book of Acts. Every single time, it means the same thing. The word Epiousios was built from something, and the strongest evidence points to the Greek verb Epeimi, Strong's number 1966. It means to come upon. Its form when describing time is epiousa. Epiousa appears 5 times in the book of Acts, in chapters 7, 16, 20, 21, and 23, and every single time it points to what comes next. Not one of them means daily. Not one of them means routine. 5 witnesses, all pointing the same direction, and Jerome himself found the same trail. In his commentary on Matthew, he noted that the lost Aramaic Gospel of the Hebrews used the word mahar for this line. Mahar means for tomorrow. The lexicons agree. The standard lexicon definition reads for the coming day, for subsistence. The root, the Aramaic, and the lexicon all converge on one thing. This word was never pointing at today's routine. It was always aimed at what comes next. If Epiousios is the adjective form of epiousa, and the evidence strongly points to this, then the word means for the coming day, not daily, not repeated, forward-looking. And there is a second layer in the grammar that no English translation preserves. In Matthew, the verb is dos. That is a one-time command, a single urgent request aimed at one moment. Give now, today. In Luke chapter 11, verse 3, the verb is didou. That is continuous, Keep giving, day after day. Two different verbs in two different Gospels for the same prayer. Matthew's version is not a formula you repeat. It is a single demand aimed forward. Give us today what we need for what is coming. You have prayed this line as a request for maintenance, bread for survival, enough to get through. But the root, Epeimi, says something different. It is aimed forward. And the grammar in Matthew says something different. It is urgent, not routine. The next time you say this line, you will hear the direction of epiousa in it. Not backward toward yesterday's needs. Forward toward what approaches. And that shifts the posture of the entire prayer from survival to readiness. Not because someone explained it to you, because the root showed you where the word was pointing. And now that you have that root, you cannot unhear it. The word does not exist anywhere else. The bread it modifies is the word Jesus uses for himself. The root it was built from means the coming day. Jerome tried two translations and neither captured it. Origen said it was invented. So what is the prayer actually asking for? That answer is what was rewritten in 382 AD, and it changes the line completely. Epiousios, a word no Greek writer had ever used, placed by the Evangelists themselves into the most intimate prayer in the text. Modifying Artos, the bread Jesus claimed as himself in John 6, built from a root that 5 witnesses in Acts confirm means the coming day. 3 threads, 1 word, and every thread points past the English. Now the 2 competing paths arrive at the same place. Jerome reached for supersubstantialem because the epi in Epiousios can also sit on top of ousia. Ousia means being, substance, essence. Epi on top of ousia gives above substance. Beyond what is material, Jerome knew the word was pointing past the physical. That is why he invented a Latin word to try to capture it. Origen, 150 years before Jerome, had already gone there. He wrote that this bread most closely corresponds to the rational nature and brings health and well-being and strength to the soul. He argued it was beneath the teaching of Jesus to ask the Father for something as worldly as physical food in a prayer that moves from heaven to forgiveness to deliverance from the evil one. And both paths land on the same ground. Whether you follow the route to epiousa and land on for the coming day, or you follow the route to ousia and land on above substance, you arrive at the same conclusion. The English word daily is the weakest possible rendering of what this prayer contains. Both paths bypass it completely. Both paths point past the material. The line reads differently now. Not give us this day our daily bread. Something closer to this. Give us today the above substance bread for what is coming. Bread that is not material. A request that is not routine. A prayer aimed forward. Bread, Jesus claimed as himself. Bread that echoes the manna you could not store and had to trust would arrive again. Bread modified by a word the evangelists invented because no existing Greek word could hold what they needed to say. 3 threads, 1 line, and all of them, every single one, point past the English word you were given. That is what Jerome rewrote in 382 AD. He could not hold the word. He split it in 2, and English inherited the lesser half. Nobody caught it. Every Greek word from this video, Epiousios, Artos, epiousa, the full definitions, every verse reference. That is inside the Greek study guide for this video. That is available to Watchman members. Link is in the description. Generations have prayed this line without access to the word the evangelists built for it. The most intimate prayer in the tradition, spoken billions of times, and the single most unusual word inside it was flattened before it reached anyone in English. That loss is quiet. It is not dramatic. It is simply the distance between what was written and what was delivered. But you have it now. You have the word. You have the date it was changed. You have the name of the man who changed it. You have the root, the 5 witnesses in Acts, the cross-reference to John 6. The prayer is returned to you in a form the English never carried. Say the Lord's Prayer out loud. When you reach daily bread, stop. Replace daily with for what is coming. Let the bread become whatever you need to be, inwardly prepared for what approaches today. Not food, not survival. The thing that would make you steady enough for what is next. Then finish the prayer from that position, or sit with the second path. Ask yourself what inner nourishment you are actually lacking today. Not groceries. The thing beneath that. The bread of life that John 6 names. The thing above substance. Let whatever answer rises be what you are requesting when you open your mouth to pray. You cannot pray this line the old way anymore. Not because the prayer changed, because you now possess the original word. And that word was never daily. It was something the Evangelists had to invent because Greek did not have a container for it. The word did not come from the language, it came from the teaching. And now the teaching is back in your hands. If this is how you read Scripture now, there is a place where this work continues every week. The Watchman tier. Link is in the description. The Evangelists invented a word for this line. They could have used any word the Greek language already had for daily. They had hemera for day. They had kathemerinon for daily in the ordinary sense. They used neither. They built something new. And for 2,000 years, translators have tried to fit it into languages that do not have a container for it. Every major manuscript preserves it unchanged. Codex Sinaiticus from the 4th century. Codex Vaticanus from the same era. Every scribe who copied this prayer for 16 centuries faithfully reproduced a word they could not fully define. The only place it did not survive was the translation. You have it back now.